For years, David put his grown-up brother and sister, and especially his mom, before me and our kids. It wasn't always like this. When we first met, David was so kind and generous, but as time passed, his family's needs always seemed to come first. He would say, "They need it more than we do." But did they? Hi, I'm Kimberly Johnson. I'm 34 years old. It felt like our own house was starving because he was feeding everyone else. When you feed the wrong people, your own house starves until one woman flipped the table and fed herself. That's my story. There were times when I was pregnant and didn't have enough to eat. I remember one night, craving a simple apple, but we didn't even have that. David had sent the last of our money to his mother. That was when I knew things had to change. I was tired of being hungry. I was tired of my children going without. I was tired of David always putting his family before us. And it's about how I finally taught David a lesson he'd never forget. It wasn't easy, but I knew I had to do something to protect my kids and myself. I had to flip the table and start feeding my own house first. It's strange to think back to the beginning, to when David and I first met. He was working at a small bookstore, and I was a regular customer. I love to read, especially stories about strong women who overcame challenges. Little did I know, I'd be living one myself someday. David was so charming. He'd always recommend books he thought I'd like, and we'd talk for hours about the characters and their adventures. He was kind and funny, and he always made me feel special. We fell in love quickly, and soon we were making plans for our future. Our wedding was small but beautiful. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had each other, and that's all that mattered. We promised to always support each other, through good times and bad. I truly believed we would. The first few years of our marriage were wonderful. We were happy and in love, building a life together. We found a small apartment, and David got a better job. We started saving for a family. Life felt full of promise. David was still the same kind, generous man I had fallen in love with. He would help anyone in need, and I admired that about him. But then, things started to change. His family started needing more and more help. At first, it seemed reasonable. His brother lost his job, and his sister was struggling to pay her bills. Of course, we wanted to help. But it soon became a pattern. David's family was always in some kind of crisis. And David, being the good son and brother, always felt obligated to help them. He'd send money without even talking to me about it, and soon, our savings started to dwindle. I started to worry. Was this going to be our life now? Always struggling to make ends meet because David was taking care of everyone else? It felt like our little family was slowly being forgotten. The happy beginning was fading, replaced by a growing unease. The first time David sent a large sum of money to his brother, I was worried, but I understood. His brother, Mark, had lost his job at the factory. He had a wife and 2 small children to feed. David felt responsible, being the older brother. He saw it as his duty. "It's just until he gets back on his feet," David assured me. "He'll pay us back when he can." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I knew what it was like to struggle. But weeks turned into months, and Mark still hadn't found a new job. David continued to send money, and our own savings were dwindling fast. I started asking questions, gently at first. "How much longer do you think we'll need to help him?" I'd ask. "Are you sure he's really looking for work?" David would get defensive. "Of course, he's looking. Do you think he wants to be dependent on us?" He'd raise his voice slightly. I hated it when he did that. Then there was his sister, Sarah. She was always having some kind of crisis. Her car broke down, she needed help with rent, or she had an unexpected medical bill. David felt he had to help her too. He couldn't bear the thought of his siblings suffering. I understood wanting to help family, but it felt like there was no end in sight. It felt like we were being drained dry. I started keeping track of the money David was sending. It was much more than I realized. Hundreds of dollars every month, money that we desperately needed for our own family. One evening, I sat David down. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "This can't keep going on. We can't afford to keep supporting your brother and sister. What about our future? What about our children?" David looked at me, his eyes filled with guilt and frustration. "I don't know what else to do, Kimberly," he said softly. "They need me." That's when I realized it wasn't just about the money. It was about something much deeper. The something deeper was his mother. Maria. David's mother was a force to be reckoned with. She was a strong woman, yes, but also very controlling. She had always been the center of David's world, and he always sought her approval. Even after we got married, it felt like she was still the most important woman in his life. Maria had a way of making David feel guilty. She would call him often late at night, complaining about her health, her finances, her loneliness. She knew exactly how to push his buttons. She'd say things like, "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," or "Your father would be so disappointed in you if he saw how you've forgotten about your family." David would always cave. He couldn't stand the thought of disappointing his mother. He felt obligated to take care of her, even if it meant sacrificing our own well-being. I tried to talk to him about it, but he wouldn't listen. "She's my mother, Kimberly," he'd say. "I have to help her." It was like he was programmed to obey her every command. Maria also had a way of manipulating situations to her advantage. She would pit David against his siblings, creating drama and making him feel like he had to choose sides. She thrived on the chaos, and David was always caught in the middle. I started to resent Maria. I knew she was the root of our problems. She was the one who was driving a wedge between us. But I didn't know how to break free from her influence. David was so deeply enmeshed in her web that I didn't know how to reach him. It felt like I was fighting a losing battle. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about his loyalty and who he felt he owed it to. And it was never me. It was always her. We decided to move to the United States, hoping for a fresh start. We thought that if we were thousands of miles away, Maria's influence would lessen. We dreamed of building a new life, just the two of us, far from the constant demands of his family. We sold most of our belongings and bought 2 plane tickets. It was a scary but exciting time. We imagined a future where we could focus on our own dreams and goals, without the constant pressure of family obligations. The first few weeks in the U.S. were amazing. We explored our new city, found a small apartment, and David landed a good job. We felt like we were finally free. We started making plans for our future, talking about buying a house and starting a family. But Maria's influence was stronger than we anticipated. She would call David every day, sometimes multiple times a day. She'd complain about everything, her health, her finances, her neighbors. She even complained about the weather. David felt obligated to listen and offer advice. He'd spend hours on the phone with her, neglecting me and our new life. He was still under her spell, even thousands of miles away. And then the requests for money started again. Maria claimed she couldn't afford her medical bills, or that her roof was leaking, or that she needed help with her groceries. David, of course, couldn't say no. He started sending money again, draining our savings and jeopardizing our future. I felt so frustrated. We had moved to the U.S. to escape this, but it was like Maria had followed us. Her influence was like an invisible chain, binding David to her. I started to lose hope that things would ever change. It felt like we were trapped in a never-ending cycle of family drama and financial strain. The fresh start we had hoped for was quickly fading away, replaced by the same old problems. The distance hadn't helped, Maria was still running our lives from afar. The empty promises became a constant in our lives. David would swear he wouldn't send any more money, that he would finally put us first. He would look me in the eye and say, "I promise, Kimberly. This is the last time." But then Maria would call, and he would crumble. It was like he had no willpower when it came to his family. He was a kind and generous man, but he was also easily manipulated. He couldn't see that his family was taking advantage of him, that they were draining us dry. I tried to reason with him, to explain that we needed to think about our own future, about our children. But he wouldn't listen. He was so blinded by his loyalty to his family that he couldn't see the damage he was doing to our marriage. I started to feel like I was living a lie. On the outside, we looked like a normal couple, building a life together in a new country. But on the inside, we were crumbling. Our finances were a mess, our relationship was strained, and I was starting to lose hope that things would ever get better. I remember one particular month when we were struggling to pay our rent. David had sent almost all of his paycheck to his mother and siblings, leaving us with barely enough to cover our basic expenses. I was terrified. I didn't know how we were going to make it. I confronted David, tears streaming down my face. "How could you do this to us?" I cried. "Don't you care about your own family? Don't you care about me?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with guilt and shame. "I'm sorry, Kimberly," he said softly. I didn't know what else to do. But his apology felt hollow. It was the same empty promise he had made so many times before. And I knew, deep down, that he would do it again. Unless I did something drastic. Unless I took matters into my own hands. Being pregnant during this time made everything so much harder. I was constantly tired and nauseous, and I needed to eat healthy foods to nourish my growing baby. But we barely had enough money for groceries. I remember one doctor's appointment where the doctor told me I was anemic. He said I needed to eat more iron-rich foods, like meat and leafy greens. But those foods were expensive, and David had already sent most of our money to his family. I felt so guilty. I was supposed to be taking care of my baby, but I couldn't even afford to feed myself properly. I would often go to bed hungry, my stomach rumbling, knowing that my baby wasn't getting the nutrients it needed. There were times when I would cry myself to sleep, feeling helpless and hopeless. I felt like I was failing as a mother. I couldn't understand how David could be so blind to our needs. How could he prioritize his family over his own wife and child? I started to resent him. I loved him, but I also felt angry and betrayed. He had promised to take care of me, but he was failing miserably. He was letting his family starve us, both literally and figuratively. One day, I was craving a simple orange. I knew it was a small thing, but I desperately wanted that burst of vitamin C. I went to the grocery store, hoping to find one that was on sale. But even the cheapest oranges were too expensive. I stood there in the produce section, tears welling up in my eyes. I felt so defeated. I couldn't even afford a single orange. That's when I knew I had to do something. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep letting David's family starve us. I had to find a way to take control of our lives. For my baby, for myself, and for our future. The orange became a symbol of everything that was wrong, a symbol of our deprivation and David's misplaced priorities. It was the last straw. That day, standing in the grocery store, unable to afford an orange, I made a decision. I was done waiting for David to change. I was done hoping that things would get better on their own. I was going to take control of our lives, even if it meant keeping secrets from my own husband. The next day, I started looking for a job. It wasn't easy. I was pregnant, and many employers were hesitant to hire someone who would soon need maternity leave. But I was determined. I applied for every job I could find, from retail to office work. Finally, I got a call back from a small accounting firm. They needed a receptionist, and they were willing to give me a chance. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to start saving. I didn't tell David about my job. I knew he would disapprove. He would say that I needed to rest, that I shouldn't be working while pregnant. But I couldn't tell him the truth, that I was working to save us from his family. Every day, I would go to work, putting on a brave face and pretending that everything was fine. I would smile and answer phones, all the while knowing that I was secretly building a safety net for our family. I opened a separate bank account, one that David didn't know about. Every paycheck, I would deposit a portion of my earnings into that account. It was slow going, but I was making progress. Little by little, I was building my own financial independence. It felt empowering to finally be doing something to change our situation. I was no longer a helpless victim. I was a warrior, fighting for my family's survival. And I knew that one day, I would have enough money to make a real difference. I had a plan, and I was determined to see it through. The secret savings account became my hope chest, filled not with dreams of the future, but with the tools to build one. One of the first things I bought with my secret savings was a new dryer. Our old one had been broken for months, and we were forced to hang our clothes to dry, which took forever and made the apartment feel cramped. David had promised to fix it, but he never seemed to have the time or the money. He was always too busy helping his family. So, I took matters into my own hands. I found a used dryer online for a good price, and I paid for it with my secret savings. When it was delivered, David was surprised. He asked where it came from, and I simply said that I had saved up some money. I didn't tell him the whole truth, but I couldn't bring myself to lie completely. He was happy to have a working dryer again. He didn't realize that it was a small victory in my larger plan. It was a symbol of my growing independence and my determination to take care of our family. Buying the dryer also helped me start building credit. I opened a small credit card, using it only for small purchases and paying it off in full each month. It was a slow process, but I knew that building good credit was essential for my future plans. I started researching different investment options, learning about stocks, bonds, and real estate. I wanted to find a way to grow my savings quickly and securely. I knew that I needed to be smart about how I invested my money. Every small step I took gave me more confidence. I felt like I was finally in control of my life. I was no longer a victim of David's family's demands. I was a strong, independent woman, building a better future for myself and my children. The dryer wasn't just a machine, it was a monument to my resolve, a tangible sign that I was taking back our lives, one small appliance at a time. And I was just getting started. The biggest blow came when David's sister, Sarah, announced that she was getting married. It wasn't a surprise. She had been dating her boyfriend for years. But what was a surprise was how much David was willing to spend on the wedding. He insisted on paying for everything: the dress, the venue, the flowers, the food. He said that it was his responsibility as her brother to give her the wedding of her dreams. I was shocked. We could barely afford to pay our own bills, and he was willing to spend thousands of dollars on his sister's wedding? I tried to reason with him, to explain that we couldn't afford it. But he wouldn't listen. He said that he had already promised Sarah, and he couldn't go back on his word. I felt so betrayed. It was like he cared more about his sister's happiness than about our own financial security. I knew that if I didn't do something, we would be completely ruined. While David was busy planning his sister's extravagant wedding, I was secretly working on my own plan. I had been saving every penny I could, and I had finally accumulated enough money for a down payment on a condo. I had found a small, affordable condo in a decent neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe and secure, and it was all mine. I knew that it was the perfect place for us to start over. I didn't tell David about my plan. I knew he would try to talk me out of it. He would say that we couldn't afford it, that we needed to be responsible. But I was tired of being responsible. I was tired of sacrificing our future for his family's sake. I had a vision for our future, and I was determined to make it happen, even if it meant keeping secrets from my own husband. David was paying for his sister's fairy tale, and I was building my own reality. A reality where my children wouldn't go hungry, and where I had the power to protect them. The wedding became the catalyst, the event that finally pushed me to take the ultimate step. The day I signed the papers for the condo was one of the happiest days of my life. It felt like I was finally taking control of my destiny. The condo was small, but it was ours. It was a place where we could feel safe and secure, a place where we could finally build a future without the constant interference of David's family. The days leading up to the closing were filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety. I was excited to finally have a place of our own, but I was also worried about how David would react when he found out. I knew he would be angry, but I hoped that he would eventually understand why I had done what I had done. I kept the documents hidden in a safe place, waiting for the right moment to reveal my secret. I wanted to wait until after Sarah's wedding, to avoid any unnecessary drama. But the longer I waited, the more anxious I became. Finally, the day came when I couldn't wait any longer. David had just returned from Sarah's wedding, exhausted and irritable. He had spent so much money on the wedding that we were now even further in debt. I knew it was a risky time to tell him, but I couldn't keep it a secret any longer. I took a deep breath and called him into the living room. "David, I need to show you something," I said, my voice trembling slightly. I reached into the safe and pulled out the condo documents. His face was a mask of confusion. He had no idea what was coming. As I handed him the papers, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. The moment of truth. The moment when everything would change. I was flipping the table, betting everything on myself. Whatever happened next, I was ready. I was ready to fight for my future, for my children, and for myself. The deed to the condo wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a declaration of independence. David took the documents from my hand, his brow furrowed in confusion. He started to read, slowly at first, then faster and faster as the words sank in. I watched his face, waiting for his reaction. His eyes widened in disbelief. He looked up at me, his mouth agape. "What is this?" he stammered. I took a deep breath. "It's the deed to a condo," I said, my voice firm despite my nervousness. "I bought it." He stared at me, speechless. "You bought a condo?" he finally managed to say. "Without telling me?" "Yes," I replied. "I bought it with my own money, the money I've been saving from my job." His face turned red with anger. "You got a job? Behind my back? And you've been saving money? How could you keep something like this from me?" "Because I knew you wouldn't approve," I said. "I knew you would tell me it was irresponsible, that we couldn't afford it. But I couldn't wait any longer, David. I couldn't keep watching you send all our money to your family while we were struggling to survive." He was silent for a moment, processing what I had said. Then, he exploded. "How dare you?" he shouted. "How dare you make such a big decision without consulting me? We're married. We're supposed to make these decisions together. And how often do you consult me before sending money to your family?" I retorted. "How many times have you promised me that you would put us first, only to break that promise the next time your mother called?" He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "I'm not finished," I said, my voice rising with anger. "I'm tired of being your second family, David. I'm tired of watching you sacrifice our future for the sake of your mother and siblings." I stepped closer to him, my eyes blazing with defiance. "This condo is ours," I said, pointing to the documents. "It's in my name, and it's going to be our new home. But there's one condition." I paused, letting my words sink in. "No more money leaves this house," I declared, my voice firm and unwavering, "until we're stable. Until we have enough money to pay our bills, to save for our children's future, and to finally live a life without constant financial stress." I looked him straight in the eye. "You have a choice, David," I said, my voice softening slightly. "You can join us in this new life, in this new home, and finally put us first. Or you can go live with the people you've been feeding all these years. The choice is yours." I watched his face, waiting for his reaction. He was silent, his expression unreadable. I had laid down the gauntlet. I had given him an ultimatum. And now, it was up to him to decide what our future would be. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but I knew it was necessary. I had to protect my children, and I had to protect myself. And if that meant risking my marriage, then so be it. The future of my family depended on it. I had finally drawn a line in the sand. The question was, would David cross it? Or would he walk away? David just stood there, frozen. He didn't say a word. His eyes were wide with shock, his mouth slightly open. It was like he had been turned to stone. The anger that had been blazing in his eyes just moments before had been replaced by a look of utter disbelief. I watched him, waiting for him to say something, anything. But he remained silent. The only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. It felt like an eternity. I could see the gears turning in his head as he tried to process everything I had told him. He was struggling to reconcile the image he had of himself as a good son and brother with the reality that he had been neglecting his own wife and children. He looked at the condo documents in his hands, then back at me, then back at the documents. He seemed to be searching for an explanation, for a way to make sense of what was happening. Finally, after what felt like an hour, he spoke. His voice was barely a whisper. I don't understand, he said, his eyes filled with confusion. How could you do this? How could you keep this from me? I had to, David, I said softly, my voice filled with sadness. I tried to talk to you, but you wouldn't listen. I tried to reason with you, but you wouldn't understand. I had no other choice. He shook his head slowly, as if trying to clear his thoughts. I need time to think, he said, his voice still barely audible. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there alone, the condo documents still clutched in my hand. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that things would never be the same again. I had finally stood up for myself, and I had finally given David a choice. Now, it was up to him to decide what he wanted. Would he choose his family, or would he choose his mother and siblings? Only time would tell. He froze, caught between the world he knew and the new reality I had created. The silence was deafening. The next few weeks were tense. David was distant and withdrawn. He spent a lot of time alone, thinking and reflecting. I could tell he was struggling with his decision. He finally started going through the bills, something he hadn't done in years. He was shocked to see how much money he had been sending to his family. He finally understood the financial strain he had put us under. Then came the inevitable phone call. Maria called, demanding money as usual. David hesitated, then told her no. It was the first time he had ever stood up to her. I wasn't in the room when he told her, but I heard the conversation. Her voice grew louder and louder, filled with anger and accusations. She called him ungrateful, selfish, and a terrible son. She said that he was ruining her life and that she would never forgive him. And then, she cursed me. She called me a gold digger, a home wrecker, and a manipulative witch. She said that I had turned David against his family and that I would eventually leave him, taking all his money with me. David tried to defend me, but Maria wouldn't listen. She just kept ranting and raving, her voice filled with venom. Finally, David hung up the phone. He came into the living room, his face pale and drawn. "I'm so sorry, Kimberly," he said, his voice filled with remorse. "She said terrible things about you." I smiled. "It's okay, David," I said, reaching out to take his hand. "Her words don't matter. What matters is that you finally stood up to her. You finally chose us." And in that moment, I knew that everything was going to be okay. The curse was nothing compared to the power of his choice. The relief was immense. It was the beginning of a new chapter. He had finally clipped the puppet strings. I had flipped the table, and now, we could start feeding our own house. Maria's anger was just background noise to the sound of a new beginning. It was a price I was willing to pay. The next few months were a journey of healing and rebuilding. David started going to therapy to understand why he had always felt the need to put his family before us. He realized that he had been living under his mother's control for so long that he didn't know how to make his own decisions. He started setting boundaries with his family, telling them that he could no longer afford to send them money. It was difficult at first, but he stuck to his guns. He knew that it was the right thing to do for our family. He also started spending more time with me and the kids. We went on family outings, cooked meals together, and simply enjoyed each other's company. It was like we were rediscovering each other all over again. David also got a new job. He had been working at the same company for years, but he wasn't happy there. He found a new job that was more challenging and fulfilling, and it paid better too. We moved into the condo, and it felt like a fresh start. We decorated it together, making it our own. It was small, but it was cozy and comfortable, and it was filled with love. We started saving money again, working towards our future goals. We opened a college fund for the kids, and we started planning for our retirement. We finally felt like we were in control of our finances. David learned to say no to his family and yes to us. He finally understood that his responsibility was to his wife and children, not to his mother and siblings. It wasn't an easy transition, but he was determined to make it work. The curse lost its power the moment he chose us. It was a testament to the strength of our love and the power of our commitment. The condo became our sanctuary, a symbol of our resilience and our newfound independence. He chose to build a new house with me, and together, we began laying the foundation. Looking back, I still can't believe I had the courage to do what I did. It was the scariest thing I have ever done in my life. But it was also the most empowering. I had finally taken control of my own destiny. Seeing David finally choose us, seeing him finally stand up to his mother, filled me with a sense of triumph that I had never experienced before. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I no longer felt like I was fighting a losing battle. There was also an immense sense of relief. I had been living with so much stress and anxiety for so long that I had almost forgotten what it felt like to be happy. Now, I could finally breathe again. I could finally relax and enjoy my life. And then there was the joy. The joy of finally being chosen by my husband, of finally being recognized as his priority. It was a feeling that I had longed for so long, and it was even better than I had imagined. I smiled, not just because Maria cursed me, but because I knew that David had finally seen the light. He had finally realized that his family was right here, with me and our children. He finally understood that home wasn't a place, it was the people you chose to surround yourself with. I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I was grateful for David's willingness to change, for his commitment to our marriage, and for his love. I was grateful for the strength that I had found within myself, the strength to stand up for what I believed in and to fight for my family. I had taught David a lesson he would never forget. And in the process, I had also taught myself a lesson. A lesson about the importance of self-respect, about the power of boundaries, and about the enduring strength of love. It wasn't just a triumph over Maria, it was a triumph over years of neglect and a victory for our family. The smile wasn't just a smile, it was a beacon of hope, illuminating our path to a brighter future. David's journey wasn't easy. He struggled with feelings of guilt and obligation towards his family. There were times when he wanted to give in, to send them money just to make them happy. But he knew that he couldn't. He knew that he had to stay strong for us. His therapy sessions were eye-opening. He learned about codependency and how it had affected his relationships. He learned how to set healthy boundaries and how to communicate his needs effectively. The new job was a breath of fresh air. He was surrounded by supportive colleagues who encouraged him to grow and develop. He felt valued and appreciated, something he hadn't felt in years. He started taking better care of himself. He started exercising and eating healthier foods. He started getting more sleep. He was becoming a better version of himself, not just for me and the kids, but for himself too. He even started learning new things. He took a cooking class, and he surprised me one night by making a delicious dinner. He started reading books, something he hadn't done since we first met. He was rediscovering his passions and interests. Our relationship deepened. We started communicating more openly and honestly. We started sharing our dreams and fears. We started supporting each other's goals. We were building a stronger, more resilient marriage. He began to understand that love wasn't about sacrificing yourself for others, it was about supporting each other and growing together. He finally learned to balance his responsibilities to his family with his responsibilities to himself. He wasn't just my husband anymore, he was my partner, my friend, and my equal. The road was bumpy, but each step forward solidified his commitment to our new life. The changes weren't superficial, they were deep-rooted and transformative. He was truly becoming the man I knew he could be. He began to feed his own soul as well as his family. Creating new boundaries with his family was an ongoing process. It wasn't a one-time event, but a continuous effort to redefine our relationships. We learned to communicate our needs and expectations clearly and respectfully. David started having conversations with his siblings, explaining that while he cared about them, he couldn't always be their financial safety net. He encouraged them to seek help from other sources, such as government assistance programs or career counseling. With Maria, the process was more challenging. She resisted the new boundaries, trying to guilt David into giving in to her demands. But David stood firm. He learned to gray-rock her, responding to her emotional outbursts with calm, neutral statements. We also limited our contact with Maria, setting specific times for phone calls and visits. We made it clear that we wouldn't tolerate her manipulative behavior or her negative comments about me. It wasn't easy. There were arguments and hurt feelings. But we knew that it was necessary to protect our family. We had to create a safe and healthy environment for our children, free from the drama and chaos that had plagued us for so long. Over time, Maria started to accept the new boundaries. She realized that David wasn't going to change his mind, and that if she wanted to maintain a relationship with him, she had to respect our decisions. We also learned to forgive each other. I forgave David for his past mistakes, and he forgave me for keeping secrets from him. We moved forward, stronger and more united than ever before. Setting those boundaries wasn't about cutting them off, it was about creating healthy relationships that respected everyone's needs. It was about teaching our children the importance of self-respect and the power of saying no. We were not just building a new house, we were building a new legacy. It showed them a new way of relating. Looking back on everything that happened, I've learned so much about family, boundaries, and self-respect. I've learned that family is not just about blood, it's about the people you choose to surround yourself with, the people who support you and love you unconditionally. I've learned that boundaries are essential for healthy relationships. They're not about being selfish or uncaring, they're about protecting yourself and your loved ones from harm. They're about creating a safe and respectful environment for everyone involved. And I've learned that self-respect is the foundation of everything. If you don't respect yourself, no one else will. You have to value your own worth, your own needs, and your own dreams. You have to be willing to stand up for yourself, even if it means risking everything. Our marriage is stronger than ever before. We've been through a lot, but we've come out on the other side, more united and more committed to each other than ever before. We've learned to communicate openly and honestly, to support each other's goals, and to celebrate each other's successes. Our children are thriving. They're growing up in a loving and supportive environment, free from the drama and chaos that used to plague us. They're learning the importance of self-respect, boundaries, and healthy relationships. We still have contact with David's family, but it's on our terms. We've created healthy boundaries that protect our family from their manipulative behavior. We've learned to say no without feeling guilty. I'm grateful for everything that has happened, even the difficult times. Because it was through those challenges that we learned the most valuable lessons. It was through those struggles that we grew stronger and more resilient. And it was through those experiences that we built the life we have today. A life filled with love, joy, and endless possibilities. We learned to feed the right people and in turn, we fed ourselves. Thank you for spending your time with my story. Feel free to share your thoughts or reactions in the comments, I'd love to hear from you.